"Let her go, doctor, because we will not pay for the surgery." My father. Elijah looked straight at the neurosurgeon and signed the "Do Not Resuscitate" order with a steady hand. He told them it was about mercy and letting me be with the Lord. But as I lay there trapped in my own body, unable to move a muscle or blink an eye, I knew the truth. He was signing my death warrant to save money. What he did not know was that my brain was fully awake. I could hear the scratch of his pen on the paper. I could hear the fake sob he let out for the nurses. And I could certainly hear what he whispered to my brother after the doctor left the room. "If she dies before Monday, we get the $2 million insurance payout, and I can finally clear my debt with the casino. My name is Zora, and I am 35 years old. I spent my whole life buying my father's love, but I only realized its true price when he tried to sell my life for a check." Before I tell you how I woke up and made him regret the day he was born, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you have ever been the one doing all the giving while your family did all the taking. The darkness was absolute. That is the first thing you need to understand about locked-in syndrome. It is like being buried alive in a coffin that is perfectly shaped like your own body. I could feel the cold plastic of the breathing tube taped to my face. I could smell the sharp, chemical sting of hospital antiseptic and the faint, lingering scent of the expensive cologne I had bought my father for his 60th birthday. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and demand to see my charts. As a forensic accountant, I have spent 10 years tracking down fraud and hidden assets for the biggest firms in Chicago. My mind is a steel trap of numbers and logic. But right now, my body was a prison. I had been driving my Mercedes G-Wagon home from a late audit when the brakes failed. I remember the pedal going all the way to the floor, the sickening crunch of metal, and then this. Silence. The door to my ICU room hissed open. I recognized the heavy rhythmic footsteps of my father Elijah. He walked with the authority of a man who had spent 40 years in the pulpit preaching about salvation while secretly gambling away the church building fund. Following him was the shuffling gait of my younger brother Darius. And then the clicking of high heels. Sarah, my sister-in-law. Dr. Evans spoke first, his voice low and professional. "Pastor Brooks, I need to be very clear with you. Zora is in a critical state, but there is brain activity. The swelling is severe. We need to perform a decompressive craniectomy immediately to relieve the pressure. It is a standard procedure, but it is expensive and her insurance status is currently pending due to the investigation into the crash. The surgery costs $150,000. We need your authorization to proceed." I waited for my father to pull out his black Amex, the one I pay off every month. I waited for him to say do whatever it takes. I have over $1 million in liquid assets in my personal accounts. Money he has access to as my emergency contact. Money I earned working 80-hour weeks while Darius sat on his couch playing video games. Instead, there was a long pause. "I am afraid that is not possible," Dr. Elijah said. His voice trembled with a performance worthy of an Oscar. "We are humble people. The church has been struggling. We do not have that kind of money, and Zora would not want to be a burden. She always said that if it came to machines keeping her alive, she would want to go. Liar." I screamed it inside my head so loud I thought my skull would fracture. "I never said that. I have a living will locked in my safe that specifically demands all life-saving measures." But he knew that. He knew exactly what he was doing. But Sir Dr. Evans pressed, and I could hear the frustration in his tone. "This is not about life support. This is a life-saving surgery. Without it, she will likely suffer brain death within 48 hours. With it, she has a fighting chance at a full recovery. She is young. She is strong." Elijah let out a heavy sigh, the sound of a man carrying the weight of the world. "It is God's will, Doctor. Who are we to interfere with the Almighty calling His angel home? If the Lord wants to take her, I will not fight Him with science I cannot afford. I will sign the papers. No surgery. Do not resuscitate. Just keep her comfortable until she passes." I felt a cold hand touch my arm. It was not the doctor. It was Sarah. Her long acrylic nails dug slightly into my skin. I could feel her leaning in close, her perfume overpowering the sterile hospital air. "It is for the best," she whispered, though I knew she was speaking to Darius, not me. "Look at her, Darius. She is a vegetable. Even if she wakes up, she will probably be drooling on herself. Imagine having to take care of that for the rest of our lives." Darius mumbled something I could not catch. My brother, the golden child, the one who got the football scholarships and the new cars while I got lectures on responsibility. I had paid for his wedding. I had paid for his failed sneaker business. And now he was standing there letting our father sign my life away. Dr. Evans sounded defeated. "Very well. If that is your decision as next of kin, I will have the nurse adjust her morphine drip. She will not feel any pain." The doctor walked out. The heavy door hissed shut, and then the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The air of solemn grief evaporated, replaced by a cold, greedy energy. "Is he gone?" Elijah asked, his voice dropping the pious act completely. "Yeah, Dad. The coast is clear," Darius said. Elijah let out a sharp breath. "That was close. Too close. If they operated and she survived, we would be ruined." I focused all my mental energy on my right hand, trying to twitch a finger, trying to signal that I was there. "I am here. I am listening." But nothing happened. I was a statue. "What about the car?" Sarah asked. Her voice was not sad. It was annoyed. "The police said the G-Wagon is totaled. I really wanted that car. I told my friends I was upgrading next week." "Forget the damn car," Elijah snapped. "Focus on the big picture. I spoke to the insurance agent this morning. Zora has a double indemnity clause for accidental death. The policy is worth $2 million. But there is a catch." "What catch?" Darius asked. "The policy expires on Monday," Elijah hissed. "She missed the renewal payment last week because she was on that business trip. If she is still breathing by Monday morning, the policy lapses and we get nothing. Absolutely nothing. And you know what happens then, Darius? You know who comes looking for me." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital room temperature. My father owed money to people you do not make wait, the kind of people who break legs first and ask questions later. That was why he was always asking for loans. That was why the church funds were always short. "So we just wait?" Darius asked nervously. "We wait," Elijah confirmed. "The doctor said 48 hours. That puts us at Sunday night. It is perfect timing. She passes on the Lord's Day, we have the funeral on Wednesday, and by Friday the check clears. I can pay off the casino debt, and there will be enough left over to buy that house in the suburbs you and Sarah have been whining about." Sarah giggled, a high-pitched sound that made my blood boil. "Well, when you put it that way, it really is a blessing. Plus, look at this ring." I felt her tugging at my left hand. She was pulling off my grandmother's vintage diamond ring, the one Big Mama had left specifically to me because she knew my father would pawn it. "It is a little big," Sarah said, sliding it onto her own finger. "But I can get it resized. Zora always had such man hands anyway." "She does not need it where she is going," Elijah muttered. "Start looking for her purse. I need her wallet. We need to clear out her cash accounts before the bank freezes them upon notification of death." "Dad, is that safe?" Darius asked. "Won't the forensic guys see that boy use your head?" Elijah laughed. "Who is the forensic expert in this family?" "She is. And she is lying right there. Who is going to catch us?" "The police. They think this was an accident. They do not know I had the mechanic loosen that brake line." The revelation hit me harder than the car crash. It was not just negligence. It was not just greed. It was murder. My own father had sabotaged my car. He had planned this. He had tried to kill me, and when that failed, he was finishing the job right here in the ICU. I felt a single tear leak from the corner of my eye. It was a physiological reaction, not an emotional one, but it terrified me. If they saw it, they would know I was in there. "Oh my God, look!" Sarah shrieked. "She is crying." I froze mentally, praying they would ignore it. "It is just a reflex," Elijah said, dismissively. "The brain is shutting down. It is just the body emptying out the fluids. Ignore it. Find the purse." I heard the sound of my leather Hermes bag being unzipped. I heard them rummaging through my life. My credit cards, my ID, the keys to my apartment. "Here it is," Darius said. "I got the Amex and the Chase Sapphire." "Good," Elijah said. "Go to the ATM near the casino. Max them out. Then go to her apartment. Sarah, you start packing up her designer clothes and bags. We will sell them on Poshmark. We need every dime." "What about you, Dad?" Darius asked. "I am going to stay here and pray," Elijah said, his voice dripping with irony. "I need to make sure the nurses do not get any heroic ideas. We need nature to take its course, fast." I heard footsteps leaving. Then the door closed again. It was just me and the man who gave me life, and was now taking it away. Elijah leaned over the bed. I could feel his breath on my face. He smelled of stale coffee and deception. He patted my cheek not gently, but with a condensing pat like you would give a dog. "You were always too smart for your own good, Zora," he whispered. "Always checking the books, always asking questions about the church budget. You should have just let it go, baby girl. You should have just kept writing the checks and kept your mouth shut. But no, you had to threaten to audit me. You left me no choice." He straightened up. "Go to sleep now. Do not fight it. You are worth more dead than you ever were alive." He sat down in the visitor chair and turned on the small television in the corner. I heard the theme song of a game show. He was going to watch TV while he waited for his daughter to die. Minutes turned into hours. I lay there in the dark, counting every beep of the heart monitor. Every beep was a second I was still alive. Every beep was a second closer to Monday. Then the door opened again. A nurse entered. I recognized her touch. It was softer than the others. She checked my vitals. "Pressure is dropping," she murmured to herself. She reached for the dial on the ventilator. I felt the flow of oxygen decrease slightly, just enough to be legal, just enough to speed things up. My panic spiked. My heart rate monitor beeped faster. "Shh," the nurse soothed. "It is okay, sweetie. Let go. Your daddy loves you. He is right here." She did not know. Nobody knew. I was alone in a room with my murderer and a well-meaning nurse who was unknowingly acting as his executioner. I realized then that I had two choices. I could let the darkness take me. I could drift away and let Elijah win. Let him cash that check. Let Sarah wear my ring. Let Darius drive my car. Or I could fight. I focused on the anger. It was a small spark at first, buried under layers of trauma and sedation. But I fed it. I fed it with every memory of Elijah missing my graduations to go to the casino. I fed it with every time Sarah made a racist joke about my hair and Darius laughed. I fed it with the knowledge that they had cut my brakes. The spark became a flame. The flame became an inferno. I did not just want to survive. I wanted to burn their world to the ground. I needed to move, just one finger, just one sign to tell the world I was still here. I concentrated all my will on my right pinky finger. Move, 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 damn it. Nothing. The nurse finished her adjustments. "Doctor said to lower the oxygen saturation to 80%, she whispered. "That should speed up the organ failure." She turned to leave. "No, no, do not leave me with him." I screamed with my soul. I pushed against the paralysis with every ounce of hatred I had. And then I felt it, a tiny microscopic twitch in my fingertip. It brushed against the rough hospital sheet. The nurse stopped. She looked back at the monitors. "Did you see that?" she asked Elijah. "See what?" Elijah grunted, not looking up from his game show. "I thought I saw a spike in her motor function." "Glitch in the machine," Elijah said quickly. "The doctor said she is gone brain dead. Do not give me false hope, nurse. It is cruel." The nurse hesitated. She looked at me. I screamed at her with my eyes. Look at me. Please look at me. She sighed and shook her head. You are right. I am sorry, Pastor. I will leave you to your vigil. She walked out and turned off the main lights, leaving the room in shadows. I was still trapped, but I had moved. I had felt the sheet. I checked the digital clock on the wall. It was Friday night, 8 p.m. I had 48 hours until Monday morning. 48 hours to wake up. 48 hours to rewrite my will. 48 hours to make sure that when I did die or if I lived, my father would wish he had died in that crash instead of me. The game was on. And Elijah had no idea he was locked in a room with the only person who knew all his secrets. He thought he was watching a dying girl. He was actually watching his own destruction unfold. The rage was a physical thing. It started in my chest, a hot, molten ball of fury that burned hotter than the fever the doctors were worried about. My father had just signed a piece of paper condemning me to death so he could pay off a gambling debt. That knowledge did something the medical interventions could not. It rewired my broken synapses through sheer force of will. I focused every ounce of that hatred into my right hand. It was not just a twitch this time. It was a command. Move. I screamed it in the silence of my mind until the darkness behind my eyelids began to fracture. The room was quiet now. Elijah had gone to the cafeteria to put on a show of grieving for anyone who would listen. Darius and Sarah had left to raid my apartment. I was alone, or so I thought. Then I felt a hand on my forehead. It was cool, dry, and familiar. I knew that touch. It belonged to Maya, the night shift nurse. But Maya was not just a nurse. 15 years ago, we had shared a dorm room at Howard University. We had studied together, struggled together, and she was the only person in this entire hospital who knew the real Zora, not the checkbook my family saw. I fought against the weight of my eyelids. It felt like lifting garage doors made of lead. Slowly, painfully, the world blurred into focus. The harsh fluorescent lights stung, making my eyes water. Maya gasped. She dropped the chart she was holding, the plastic clipboard clattering against the linoleum floor. She rushed to the bedside, her dark eyes wide with shock. Zora, she whispered, her voice trembling. Oh my God, you are in there. I tried to speak, but my throat was a desert and the tube was still in place. Panic flared in Maya's eyes. She reached for the call button to summon the doctor, to summon my father. No. I did not say it. I could not speak. But I managed to shake my head. It was a microscopic movement, barely an inch to the left and right. But Maya saw it. She froze her hand, hovering over the red button. She looked at me, really looked at me, searching for the friend she knew. You do not want me to call them, do you? She asked softly. I blinked once. Yes. Maya lowered her hand. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Zora, your dad? He signed a DNR. He said you would not want to be a burden. He said there was no money for the surgery. I closed my eyes and opened them again, staring intensely at her. I needed her to understand without words. I needed her to be my voice. I moved my lips around the tube, mouthing a single name. James. Maya frowned, trying to read my lips. Jane? No. James? James Sterling. Your lawyer. I blinked again. Hard. Okay, she said, taking a deep breath. Okay, Zora, I got you. I am going to purge the visitor log for the last 10 minutes. Nobody knows you woke up. Just hold on. She pulled her personal phone from her scrub pocket, her thumbs flying across the screen. I lay there, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting. Every second felt like an hour. If Elijah came back now, if he saw my eyes open, he would find a way to finish what the car crash started. He would pinch the oxygen tube or overdose my drip. I was terrified, but the terror was fuel. 30 minutes later, the door creaked open. It was not my father. It was James Sterling. He looked out of place in the ICU with his three-piece Italian suit and the aura of a man who billed $600 an hour, but seeing him was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. Maya stood guard at the door. James looked at me, his face impassive, but I saw the tightening of his jaw. He leaned down. Maya says you are awake and you are in danger. Is that correct? I blinked. She says you want to play dead, that you want to go home with them in this condition. Zora, that is suicide. We should call the police right now. We can get an emergency injunction. I shook my head again. It was painful, the stiffness in my neck radiating down my spine, but I had to make him understand. The police would treat this as a civil dispute or a tragic family misunderstanding. My father was a respected community leader. Without proof, it was his word against a brain-damaged daughter. I needed more than safety. I needed a conviction. I mouthed the words slow and deliberate. Brakes. Cut. James stiffened. He pulled a notepad from his pocket and wrote it down. You think he tampered with the car? I blinked. James let out a low whistle. Okay, I get it. You want to catch him. You want him to hang himself. I blinked again. Here is the plan, James said, his voice turning into the cold steel of a litigator. I will talk to the doctor. We will tell your father that you have stabilized, but slipped into a persistent vegetative state. We will say that the hospital can no longer keep you because insurance won't cover long-term care for a lost cause. We will recommend home hospice. They will take you to your house because it is free. It was a gamble, a massive, terrifying gamble. I was voluntarily putting myself in the hands of people who wanted me dead. But I had an advantage they did not know about. My house was a smart home. I had installed a new security system 3 months ago that recorded audio and video in every room, uploaded directly to a cloud server only I could access. I just needed to get inside. The next morning, the performance began. I lay limp in the bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, letting drool pool at the corner of my mouth. It was humiliating, but it was necessary. Elijah stood at the foot of the bed, listening to the doctor who James had thoroughly threatened with a malpractice suit if he did not cooperate, explain that I was effectively a shell. It is a tragedy, the doctor said, avoiding Elijah's eyes. But she is stable enough to be moved. There is nothing more we can do here. Elijah did not look sad. He looked like he had just won the lottery. Praise God, he said, looking up at the ceiling. We will take her home. We will care for her until the Lord decides it is time. Darius smirked behind his back. I could practically hear his thoughts. No hospital bills means more money for them. The ambulance ride to my house was a blur of bumps and nausea. When they wheeled me through the front door of my own home, the smell hit me first. Fried chicken grease and stale beer. My sanctuary, my pristine minimalist haven in Hyde Park, smelled like a frat house. They dumped me, literally dumped me onto the hospital bed they had rented and shoved into the corner of the living room. They did not even bother to carry me upstairs to my master suite. Why would they? The master suite was for the living. The living room corner was for the dying. I lay there paralyzed by choice, listening to them colonize my life. I heard the clinking of glasses. To Zora, Elijah boomed, his voice slurring slightly. For being the best investment this family ever made. Cheers, Darius and Sarah chorused. I stared at the crown molding I had paid $10,000 to install, breathing rhythmically, forcing my body to remain limp. The rage was cooling, now hardening into something sharper. A weapon. Night fell. The house grew quiet as the alcohol took its toll on Elijah and Darius. I heard their heavy snoring drifting down from the upstairs bedrooms, my bedrooms. But someone was still awake. I heard footsteps approaching the hospital bed, the click of heels on the hardwood. Sarah. She stood over me, silhouetted by the moonlight streaming through the bay windows. She was wearing my silk robe, the one I bought in Paris. It was too tight on her, straining at the seams. She held a glass of my most expensive wine in one hand. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. Her breath smelled of Merlot and malice. You can hear me, can't you? she whispered. I read on Google that sometimes vegetables can still hear. It must be torture. She took a sip of wine, letting a drop fall onto my cheek. She did not wipe it away. You always thought you were better than us, didn't you, Zora Miss Perfect? Miss Summa Cum Laude. You looked at Darius like he was a charity case. You looked at me like I was trash. She laughed a low, ugly sound. Well, look at you now. You are just a broken doll. And we are the ones playing with the house. She reached out and grabbed my left hand. Her fingers were rough and clammy. She began to twist the diamond ring on my finger. My grandmother's ring. It was a 2-carat vintage solitaire, the only thing of real sentimental value I owned. Big Mama had given it to me on her deathbed, making me promise never to let Elijah sell it. My finger was swollen from the fluids and the trauma. The ring did not want to come off. Sarah grunted, yanking hard. Pain shot up my arm, but I did not flinch. I did not blink. I stared past her into the void. With a final violent tug, the ring popped off. Sarah held it up to the moonlight, watching the diamond fracture the light. Beautiful, she cooed. She slipped it onto her own finger. It was too small for her, sitting awkwardly above the knuckle, but she preened anyway, admiring her hand. She leaned back in close to my ear. This looks better on my hand now, she whispered. Besides, where you are going, you won't need jewelry. You won't need anything. She patted my cheek, a mocking parody of affection. Good night, Zora. Try not to die before Monday. We really need that money. She turned and walked away, swaying slightly, taking my grandmother's legacy and my dignity with her. I lay in the darkness, the spot where the ring used to be throbbing. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since the accident, I smiled. A small, invisible smile in the dark. Because Sarah didn't know. She didn't know that the living room had a 4K camera hidden in the motion sensor of the alarm system. She didn't know that the microphone had picked up every word of her confession. And she certainly didn't know that the vegetable in the bed was already calculating exactly how many years in federal prison stealing a diamond ring from a vulnerable adult would add to her sentence. Enjoy the ring, Sarah, I thought. It is the last piece of jewelry you will ever wear. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. I had 48 hours to make them confess to the brake tampering, and I knew exactly how to do it. I was going to use their own greed as the bait. Saturday morning arrived, not with the gentle warmth of the sun streaming through my bay windows, but with the harsh reality of my own filth. I had been lying in the same position for 14 hours. My mouth tasted like cotton in decay. My skin felt tight and itchy, a layer of sweat drying and re-wetting under the heavy synthetic blankets they had thrown over me. The hospital nurse had bathed me sponge bath style before I left the ICU, but that felt like a lifetime ago. Here in my own living room, surrounded by my hand-picked mid-century modern furniture and my collection of first edition books, I was rotting. My father Elijah sat in my favorite leather armchair, the one I had imported from Italy. He was not reading his Bible. He was staring at his phone, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy that vibrated through the floorboards. I could feel the tremors in the frame of the hospital bed. He was terrified. Good. I focused on my breathing. In, out. Keep it shallow. Keep it ragged. I had to look like I was fading. My forensic mind, usually reserved for tracking hidden assets in offshore accounts, was now tracking the movements of my enemies. I was building a case file in my head. Exhibit A was the conversation Elijah was having right now. He dialed a number. I knew who he was calling even before he spoke. I had seen the incoming calls on his phone records for months. It was Marcus Big T Thompson, a loan shark who ran his operation out of a barber shop on the south side. Yeah, Big T, it is Elijah. Look, I know I said Friday, I know. Put the gun away, man. We are family. Elijah listened, flinching as if he had been slapped. Monday. I swear on my mother's grave. Monday morning. The check is guaranteed. 2 million. I will have your 100 grand plus the vig by noon. Just give me 48 hours. He paused, listening again. His eyes darted to me. Yeah, she is here. She is. She is not going to make it. It is just a matter of time. The Lord is calling her home. He hung up and wiped a layer of sweat from his forehead. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and hatred. He needed me to die so badly that he was practically praying for my heart to stop. I could see him doing the math. If I lingered past midnight on Sunday, he was a dead man. Just let go, Zora, he whispered to the room. Stop being so stubborn. You always were too stubborn. Just die already and save your father. The front door slammed open, bringing a gust of cold Chicago wind and the loud voices of Darius and Sarah. They walked in carrying bags from Popeyes and a case of beer. My house, which I kept as a sanctuary of peace and essential oils, now smelled like fried grease and cheap lager. Yo, Dad, Darius shouted. You want a breast or a thigh? Keep your voice down, Elijah hissed, pointing at me. Why? Sarah asked, dropping her purse on my coffee table without a coaster. She is a vegetable, Elijah. Brain dead. She does not know if we are whispering or screaming. She walked over to the hospital bed. I felt her presence before I saw her. She loomed over me chewing on a piece of chicken. God, it smells in here, Sarah said, wrinkling her nose. Did anyone change her diaper? I ain't touching that, Darius said from the kitchen, his mouth full. That is gross. We can't just let her rot, Elijah said weakly. The hospice nurse comes on Monday morning to verify death. If she looks neglected, they might ask questions. Monday is 2 days away, Sarah said, dismissing him. We will hose her down Sunday night before she, you know, expires. She sat down on the edge of my hospital bed. My mattress dipped under her weight. This was a violation of my personal space that made my skin crawl. In my previous life, nobody touched me without permission. Now my sister-in-law was using my deathbed as a picnic bench. She opened a pizza box she had brought in. Apparently, the chicken was not enough. The smell of pepperoni and artificial cheese wafted into my nose, making my stomach cramp with hunger. I had not eaten in days. So Darius, babe, listen to this, Sarah said, talking to her husband across the room while she picked a slice of pepperoni off the pizza. I was looking at the floor plan of this place. It is huge, like way too big for just us. We are keeping it, Darius said, walking in with a beer. Dad gets the insurance money to pay off his debts, but Zora's will leaves the house to next of kin. That is Dad. And Dad is going to deed it to us, right? Dad? Elijah grunted. Yeah, whatever. I just need the cash. Okay. So, Sarah continued, gesturing with her pizza slice, I am thinking we knock down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. Open concept. And that office of hers, the one with all the boring books and the locked file cabinets. My heart rate spiked. My office, my sanctuary. It was where I kept my servers, my encrypted hard drives, and the framed CPA certificate that proved I was somebody. That room has the best light, Sarah said. I am thinking we turn it into a gaming room for you, babe. We can put your streamer setup in there. Get rid of that ugly mahogany desk and put in some RGB lighting. Darius lit up. Hell yeah. I can finally start my Twitch channel for real. Zora never let me touch her Wi-Fi. She said I would compromise her security firewall or whatever. She was so paranoid. Paranoid, Sarah laughed. She was selfish. That is what she was. Sitting up here in this ivory tower judging everyone. Look at her now. Sarah leaned back, taking a bite of the pizza. As she chewed, a clump of half-masticated crust and cheese fell from her mouth. It landed directly on my cheek. It was warm and wet and disgusting. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach up and tear her blonde extensions out by the root. Oops, Sarah giggled. She did not wipe it off. She did not apologize. She just looked at the crumb on my face and laughed. Darius, look, she called out. I think Zora is hungry. Darius walked over, looked at the food on my face and snorted. That is messed up, Sarah. He did not help me either. He just took a sip of his beer and turned away. I lay there, the grease seeping into my pores, the crumb drying on my skin. This was it. This was the bottom. They had stripped me of my ring, my dignity, and now they were defiling my home and my body. But they were also giving me everything I needed. My home security system was recording audio in high definition. Every word about the will, every mention of the debts, every plan to repurpose my assets before I was even cold, it was all going to the cloud. I need to use the bathroom, Elijah announced, standing up. I am going to use the one in the master suite. The shower pressure in the guest bath is trash. No, I screamed internally. Not my bathroom, not my sanctuary. As Elijah lumbered up the stairs, leaving me with the two parasites, Darius began wandering around the living room, touching things. He picked up my iPad. Locked. He picked up my limited edition Cause statue. He weighed it in his hands, wondering how much it would fetch on eBay. Then his eyes landed on the side table by the door. My keys. Specifically, the heavy leather-bound fob to my Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. The car I had bought as a gift to myself after cracking the massive Detroit embezzlement case last year. It was my pride and joy, matte black custom rims, bulletproof glass. Darius picked up the keys. The metal jingled. "Yo, Sarah," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "What?" Sarah asked, wiping her greasy hands on my duvet cover. "We are out of beer," Darius lied. There was a full case on the floor. "I think we need to make a run to the liquor store. Maybe hit up Club Vibe on the way back." Sarah looked at the keys and squealed, "You are going to drive the tank." "Why not?" Darius tossed the keys in the air and caught them. "She isn't using it. Besides, as the future owner of this estate, I need to make sure the engine stays warm." "But the police said the car in the accident was totaled," Sarah said, confused. "That was her work sedan," Darius corrected. "The boring Ford she takes to audit sites so she doesn't look rich. The G-Wagon has been sitting in the garage under a tarp. Baby, this ride cost 200 grand. We are going to look like royalty rolling up to the club." He walked over to the window and pressed the unlock button. From the garage I heard the distinctive heavy thunk of the G-Wagon's locks disengaging. The beast was waking up. Darius did a little victory dance. "I am going to look so fly in this." He grabbed his jacket. Sarah jumped up, smoothing down her dress. "Wait, should we ask your dad?" Sarah asked. "Dad is in the shower," Darius said. "Besides, what is he going to do? Ground me. I am 32 years old. We will be back in 2 hours, just going to take it for a spin." He looked at me one last time. "Don't go anywhere, sis," he mocked. "Hold the fort down." Sarah laughed, grabbing her purse. "Bye, Zora. Try not to haunt us." They walked out the door, leaving it slightly ajar. I heard the garage door rumble open. I heard the twin-turbo V8 engine of the AMG G63 roar to life. It was a beautiful, aggressive sound. I lay in the silence of the living room, the pizza crumbs still stuck to my cheek, listening to them back my car out of the driveway. Darius thought he was stealing a joyride. He thought he was taking his successful sister's toy for a spin to impress the girls at Club Vibe. "Go ahead, idiot," I thought, a cold, sharp smirk forming in my mind. What Darius did not know was that my G-Wagon was not just a car, it was a mobile command center. It had a remote kill switch, GPS tracking, and an interior cabin camera that recorded everything to a secure server. But more importantly, I had installed a parental control feature via the Mercedes app on my phone. A feature designed for valets or teen drivers. It allowed the owner to limit the speed, lock the doors remotely, and my personal favorite, control the audio system. Darius was about to drive a $200,000 cage into the Chicago night, and as soon as he was far enough away that he couldn't walk back, I was going to introduce him to the real Zora. I focused on my right hand. The movement was getting easier. I wiggled my index finger under the blanket, then my thumb. Soon I would have enough dexterity to reach the phone hidden in the secret pocket of the hospital gown Maya had put on me. "Drive fast, Darius. Drive far, because you are driving straight into a felony charge." I closed my eyes and listened to the engine fade into the distance. The first domino had just fallen. Now I just had to wait for the crash. Not a car crash, Darius was too vain to scratch the paint. I was waiting for the crash of his entire life. And it was going to be spectacular. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 in the afternoon on Saturday, breaking the tense silence of the house. I knew who it was before the door even opened. Elijah had been pacing the floorboards for the last hour, muttering to himself about timelines and probate courts. He needed a legal loophole, and he had called in the only man shady enough to provide one on a weekend. Ray Jenkins walked into my living room, bringing with him the smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne that seemed to cling to his polyester suit. Ray was not a real lawyer. He had been disbarred 5 years ago for commingling client funds, but he still operated in the shadows of the community, drafting quick wills for the elderly and helping pastors like my father launder donation money. He was a bottom feeder, and right now he was hungry. "Well, well," Ray said, looking down at me with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not offer condolences. He just looked at me like I was a broken ATM that needed to be pried open. "She looks pretty far gone, Elijah. Are you sure she can even understand what is happening?" "Does it matter?" Elijah snapped. He was sweating again, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "The doctor said she is a vegetable, Ray. Lights are on, but nobody is home. But I need to access her liquid assets before Monday morning. If she dies intestate, the state freezes everything for months. I do not have months. I do not have days." Ray nodded, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "I brought the standard power of attorney forms, durable and immediate. It gives you full control over her bank accounts, her real estate, and her investment portfolios. Since she cannot sign, we will need a thumbprint. In the state of Illinois, a witness thumbprint from an incapacitated person is a legal gray area. But I have a notary friend who owes me a favor. He will backdate it and certify that she was lucid when she signed." I lay there listening to them conspire to commit fraud. My heart rate monitor beeped a steady rhythm, masking the adrenaline flooding my system. They thought they were being clever. They thought they were holding all the cards. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. My house was not just a building. It was a fortress of technology. And I had given the keys to the castle to James Sterling. 3 hours ago, while Elijah was in the shower and the house was empty of Darius and Sarah, I had managed to wiggle my hand enough to reach the smartphone hidden in the pocket of my hospital gown. I had sent a single text to James. "Execute Protocol Phoenix." It was a contingency plan we had designed years ago, not for my family specifically, but for any scenario where I might be incapacitated and under threat. James had remote access to my home network, including the high-speed laser printer sitting in my home office just 10 feet away. I heard the printer hum to life. Whir, click, whir. The sound was loud in the quiet house. Elijah jumped. "What was that?" he asked, looking around nervously. "Just the printer," Ray said dismissively, walking over to my desk. "It probably just woke up from sleep mode. Technology does that." Ray grabbed the paper tray. "I need to print 2 copies of the POA, one for the bank and one for the insurance company." He tapped a few keys on his laptop, which was connected to my guest Wi-Fi. He hit print. The printer whirred again. Paper began to slide out into the tray. I held my breath. This was the moment. This was the turn. If Ray or Elijah actually read the document that was printing right now, the game would be over. They would see that the header did not say General Durable Power of Attorney. They would see that the legal jargon in the first paragraph did not grant Elijah authority over my assets. Instead, it granted him liability for my debts. James had intercepted the print job. He had swapped the file in the queue. The document sliding into the tray was a deed of assumption of debt and liability. It was a terrifyingly binding contract usually used in corporate buyouts. By signing it, or by accepting the authority granted within it, the signatory agreed to personally assume full responsibility for all outstanding debts associated with a specific shell company I owned, called Obsidian Ventures. Obsidian Ventures was a trap I had built to catch corporate embezzlers, but today it was going to catch my father. The company held no assets, only a manufactured debt of $5 million in high-risk futures contracts. If Elijah put his signature or his acceptance on that paper, he was not inheriting my wealth. He was inheriting a $5 million anchor that would drag him to the bottom of the ocean. Ray grabbed the papers from the tray. He did not read them. He just glanced at the signature line to make sure there was a spot for the thumbprint. He was lazy. He was arrogant. And he was perfect. "All right, let's get this over with," Ray said, walking back to the hospital bed. He pulled an ink pad from his pocket. It was a small black square, the kind they use at police stations for booking criminals. Elijah stood on my left side, Ray on my right. They loomed over me like vultures. "Grab her hand," Ray instructed. Elijah reached down and took my right hand. His skin was clammy. His grip was firm, too firm. He squeezed my fingers, forcing them to uncurl. I felt a surge of revulsion so strong I almost gagged. This was my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who had walked me to the bus stop on my first day of kindergarten. Now he was manhandling my paralyzed limb to rob me blind. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to smash my fist into his face. But I had to be limp. I had to be the vegetable they wanted me to be. I let my hand hang heavy in his grasp. "Okay, hold her thumb out," Ray said, opening the ink pad. Elijah isolated my thumb, pressing it hard onto the black sponge. The ink was cold and wet. It felt like slime. "Now the paper," Ray said, holding the document flat on the bedside table. They pressed my inky thumb onto the line marked grantor. "Press harder," Ray grunted. "We need a clear print so the bank does not ask questions." Elijah leaned his weight onto my hand. I felt my thumb joint pop. The pain was sharp, but I did not flinch. I stared straight ahead at the ceiling, focusing on a small water stain in the plaster, imagining it was a target. "There," Ray said, lifting my hand. "Perfect." He looked at the smudge of black ink on the white paper. It was done. I had officially signed the document. "Now you sign here as the grantee," Ray said, handing a pen to Elijah. "This indicates you accept the powers and responsibilities transferred to you." Elijah took the pen. His hand was shaking slightly, not from guilt but from anticipation. He thought he was signing for millions. He scribbled his signature on the line with a flourish. "Done." Elijah breathed out a sigh of relief that sounded like a tire deflating. "Is it legal?" "It is now," Ray said, grinning. "I will get my notary to stamp this tonight. By Monday morning you can walk into her bank and empty the accounts. You can liquidate her stocks. You can even sell this house if you want. It is all yours, Elijah." Elijah looked at the paper. He looked at the ink on my thumb. He looked at me. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. A tiny spark of the father he used to be before the gambling addiction took over. But it was extinguished instantly by the thought of the money. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wet wipe. He gently cleaned the ink from my thumb. It was a tender gesture that made the betrayal burn even hotter. It was the tenderness of a butcher calming the lamb before the slaughter. He leaned down close to my face. I could see the broken veins in his nose. I could see the greed in his pupils. He kissed me on the forehead. His lips were dry. "Thank you, baby girl," he whispered softly so only I could hear. "You finally did something good for this family. You are finally useful." The words echoed in my skull. Finally useful. All my straight A's, all my scholarships, all the times I bailed him out of debt, all the times I bought groceries for the family when the church funds ran dry. None of that was useful. None of that mattered. To him, I was only useful as a corpse with a checkbook. I watched them walk towards the door, Elijah clapping Ray on the back, laughing about how they were going to celebrate. "Don't spend it all in one place," Ray joked. "I won't," Elijah promised. "First thing Monday, I am paying off Big T. Then I am going to buy a new Cadillac, a white one, to match my robes." They exited the room, leaving the scent of stale smoke and treachery behind them. I lay there, the spot on my forehead where he had kissed me burning like a brand. Useful. Oh, Daddy, you have no idea. I was very useful. I had just successfully transferred $5 million of debt onto your name. When you walk into that bank on Monday morning, you are not going to be making a withdrawal. You are going to be triggering a federal foreclosure on every asset you own. You just signed your own bankruptcy papers and you thanked me for it. The document lay on the table where they had left the duplicate copy. The ink on my thumbprint was already drying. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to darken. Saturday was ending. I had survived the first 24 hours. But the real danger was coming tonight. Sarah and Darius would be back soon. And if my calculations were correct, Darius was currently driving my G-Wagon down the interstate at 90 miles an hour. It was time to check the Mercedes app. It was time to see if my little brother was enjoying his joyride. Because I was about to turn his party into a prison. The legal trap was set. Now it was time to spring the physical one. The Mercedes G-Wagon is a fortress on wheels designed to withstand bullets and rough terrain, but it was not designed to withstand the stupidity of my brother Darius. From my vantage point on the hospital bed, I could not physically see the highway, but I saw everything through the glow of the smartphone hidden beneath my sheets. I had the interior cabin camera feed open and the audio was crystal clear. Darius was driving with his knees, one hand holding a beer he had cracked open, and the other tapping on the steering wheel to some loud bass-heavy track that was rattling the custom Burmester speakers I had paid extra for. Sarah was in the passenger seat, feet up on the dashboard, snapping endless selfies for her Instagram story, with captions like, "Living my best life" and "boss moves." They looked like royalty. They felt untouchable. But they were driving a stolen vehicle and they did not even know it yet. 10 minutes ago, while Elijah was busy celebrating his victory with a glass of scotch, I had used my thumb to access the remote vehicle disablement system. I did not just turn the engine off. That would have been too simple. I initiated the high-risk theft protocol. This feature was designed for carjackings. It silently alerted the nearest police dispatch that the vehicle had been taken by force and that the perpetrators were likely armed and dangerous. I watched on the screen as the blue and red lights washed over the leather interior. Darius cursed, spilling beer onto his lap. "Oh no," Darius groaned, staring into the rearview mirror. "It is the cops. Hide the beer, Sarah. Throw it out the window." "You throw it out!" Sarah shrieked. "I am not getting a littering ticket." "Just chill," Darius said, trying to sound tougher than he was. "It is probably just speeding. I will tell them it is my sister's car. I have the same last name. It will be fine." He pulled over to the shoulder. But this was not a normal traffic stop. Usually a lone officer walks up to the window. This time 3 squad cars boxed them in. I heard the aggressive bark of the police loudspeaker through the cabin microphone. "Driver, turn off the engine. Throw the keys out the window. Keep your hands where I can see them. Do it now." Darius looked confused. His arrogance was evaporating like mist. "Why are they yelling?" he whispered. "Just do it, Darius," Sarah cried. She was already hyperventilating. Darius turned off the engine. He tossed my leather key fob onto the asphalt. He put his trembling hands out the window. "Step out of the vehicle slowly. Walk backwards towards the sound of my voice." Darius opened the door. The camera angle shifted, showing his terrified face as he stepped into the blinding spotlight of the police cruisers. Sarah was sobbing in the passenger seat, muttering about how this was going to ruin her reputation. I lay in my living room, smiling internally. But the show was just getting started. The police were not just going to arrest them for auto theft. They were going to search the vehicle. And I knew exactly what they were going to find, because I knew my brother better than he knew himself. Darius had a habit, a bad one. He liked to party, but he was too cheap to pay for storage and too paranoid to keep his stash at his house where Sarah might smoke it all. 2 weeks ago, he had borrowed my car to move some boxes, and I had noticed the carpet under the driver's seat was loose. I had checked it then and found a magnetic box attached to the seat frame containing an ounce of high-grade cocaine. I had left it there. I knew eventually he would come back for it, or he would get caught with it. Today was that day. I listened as the officers secured Darius in the back of a cruiser. Then came the inevitable sound of the K9 unit. The dog barked excitedly. "We have a hit," the officer shouted. They tore the car apart. It did not take long. "Well, well, look what we have here," I heard an officer say. "Looks like enough powder to charge you with intent to distribute, son." Darius was screaming now. "That is not mine. It is my sister's car. It must be hers. She is a drug addict. Check her records." I almost laughed out loud. Me, a forensic accountant with top secret clearance and a drug habit. It was pathetic. Sarah immediately turned on him. "Officer, he is lying!" she shouted from the passenger seat. "I saw him put it there. I did not know what it was. I am just a victim here. He kidnapped me. The loyalty of the wicked is a fragile thing." The feed cut out as the police disconnected the battery for towing. My G-Wagon was heading to the impound lot. Darius was heading to county jail. Sarah was likely being detained for questioning. Phase 1 was complete. Now for the reaction. I tucked the phone back into my pocket just as the house phone rang. It was a landline we kept for emergencies, and it sat right on the side table next to Elijah's armchair. Elijah picked it up. His face was flushed with alcohol and triumph. "Hello," he boomed. I watched his face change. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking gray and old. The glass of scotch in his hand trembled. "What do you mean, arrested?" he stammered. "Grand theft auto. Possession of a controlled substance. That is impossible. It is his sister's car." He listened for a moment longer, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way out. "No, officer, do not put him in general population. My son is a good boy. He has anxiety. How much is bail?" He grabbed a notepad and scribbled a number. $50,000. "For a bond." Okay, I can pay that. I will pay it right now. Just let me speak to him." He listened to Darius wailing on the other end. "Daddy, get me out of here." Darius sobbed loud enough for me to hear from the receiver. "They put me in a cell with a guy named Cutter. Please, Dad." "I am coming, son. I am handling it." Elijah said, his voice shaking. "Hang tight." He slammed the phone down. He looked at me, but he did not see me. He only saw a piggy bank. He rushed over to my desk where Ray the lawyer had left his laptop open. Elijah had logged into my main banking portal earlier using the password he found in my notebook. He thought he had full access. He thought the power of attorney he signed gave him the right to drain my life savings to save his criminal son. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. Elijah was typing furiously. I heard the frantic clicking of the mouse. "Okay, transfer funds," he muttered to himself. 50,000 to the bail bondsman. Confirm." There was a silence. A long, heavy silence. Then a sound I will never forget. A low, guttural noise of pure confusion and horror. "What is this?" Elijah whispered. He hit the enter key again. Harder. "Access denied. Account frozen. Suspicious activity reported." He tried another account. "My savings. Frozen." He tried my investment portfolio. Locked. He stared at the screen, his mouth open. The screen was flashing a red warning box. "Due to a recent flagging of fraudulent identity theft, all assets under this Social Security number have been secured pending federal investigation. Please contact the fraud department immediately." "No, no, no!" Elijah yelled. He slammed his fist onto the desk. "Not now, not tonight." He grabbed the phone and dialed the bank's emergency number. I listened as he navigated the automated menu, screaming representative at the robotic voice. Finally, a human answered. "This is Elijah Brooks," he shouted. "I am the power of attorney for Zora Brooks. I am trying to make an emergency transfer and your system is blocking me. Unfreeze it now." I heard the faint voice of the bank teller on the other end. "I am sorry, sir, but the system shows that Zora Brooks filed a preemptive fraud alert 48 hours ago. She stipulated that any attempt to access her funds from a non-recognized IP address or any attempt to use a power of attorney document without her physical presence and a biometric voice confirmation should be treated as a hostile takeover. But she is in a coma, Elijah screamed. She cannot give voice confirmation. Then I am afraid we cannot unlock the funds, the teller said calmly. It is for her protection, sir. Identity theft against the incapacitated is a very serious crime. Elijah dropped the phone. It dangled by its cord, swinging back and forth like a pendulum, counting down the remaining time of his life. He turned to look at me. His eyes were wild. He looked like a trapped animal. You, he whispered. Even in a coma, you are ruining everything. He did not know the half of it. He thought the money was just frozen. He did not know that by attempting that transfer, he had just pinged the location of the laptop to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. He did not know that the document he signed earlier meant that every time he tried to access my money, he was actually accepting liability for another chunk of the massive debt I had fabricated. The phone rang again. It was Darius. "Dad, did you send the money?" Darius screamed. "They are moving me." Elijah stared at the phone. He looked at the laptop. He looked at me. "I cannot," he whispered to the ringing phone. "I cannot get the money, son." He sank into the chair, burying his face in his hands. He was crying. Not for me, not for the daughter lying paralyzed in the corner. He was crying because his golden child was going to spend the night in a cage, and he was powerless to stop it. But the night was not over, and I was not done with him yet. I had taken his son. I had taken his hope. Now it was time to take his reputation. The email to the church elders was scheduled to go out in exactly 10 minutes. And unlike the bank account, this was something he could not freeze. I lay there in the dark listening to my father weep, and I felt a surge of strength return to my limbs. My toes wiggled, my legs tensed. The paralysis was fading. I was coming back. And I was bringing hell with me. The silence of the house was replaced by the frantic clacking of keys as Elijah hunched over my laptop like a man trying to defuse a bomb. He had wiped the tears for Darius away and replaced them with a manic determination. He was convinced that there had to be a way in. He believed that if he just tried enough passwords or clicked enough buttons, he could bypass the firewall I had spent a decade building. It was insulting, really. I am a forensic accountant who consults for the federal government, and he thought he could hack my life with a password he stole from my diary when I was 16. I watched him from the bed. My eyes were half closed, feigning the sleep of the comatose, but my mind was recording every keystroke. He was trying to access my offshore investment accounts now. These were accounts I had set up for my retirement money, that I had bled for money that he felt entitled to simply because his DNA ran through my veins. "Try Bible verse 1, 2, 3, he muttered to himself, his fingers trembling as they hit the keys. Incorrect password. The screen flashed amber. Try Elijah saved incorrect password. The screen flashed orange. He was sweating profusely now. The expensive scotch he had been drinking was seeping out of his pores, turning the air around him sour. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was a list of potential passwords he had probably been compiling for years, watching me over my shoulder whenever I visited. "Come on, Zora," he hissed at the screen, as if the laptop was the daughter he hated. "You always use the same things. Think. Think like her." He typed in, "Big Mama, 1955. My breath hitched in my throat. That was the year my grandmother was born. It was a password I used for my personal journal, but never for my finances. But the system paused. It was processing. Elijah grinned, a predatory, triumphant grin that made his face look twisted in the blue light of the monitor. "Gotcha," he whispered. But he didn't have me. He had triggered a trap door. Suddenly, the screen went black. Elijah froze, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "What happened?" he asked the empty room. Then a skull and crossbones appeared on the screen in a bright violet red. It was not a standard operating system error. It was a custom graphic I had designed specifically for unauthorized access attempts. Below, the skull-scrolling text began to run across the screen in bold block letters. Security violation detected. Federal Banking Regulation Code 18. Unauthorized access attempt from non-secure location. Geolocation locked. IP address traced. Forwarding coordinates to FBI Cybercrimes Division and IRS Fraud Unit. No. Elijah gasped. He scrambled back from the desk, knocking his chair over. No, 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 stop it. He reached out and slammed the laptop shut, as if physically closing the computer would stop the digital signal that was already traveling through the fiber optic cables. He stared at the closed aluminum lid chest, heaving, terrified that the FBI was going to rappel through the skylight at any second. I lay there fighting the urge to smirk. The FBI was not coming. Not yet, anyway. That warning was a dummy program, a psychological weapon designed to induce exactly this level of panic, and it was working perfectly. Elijah began to pace the room. He ran his hands through his thinning gray hair, pulling at the roots. "What do I do?" he whispered. "I can't pay the bail. I can't pay Big T, and now the feds are watching the accounts." He looked at me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. "You did this?" he accused, pointing a shaking finger at my paralyzed body. "Even like this, you are haunting me. You are a curse, Zora, a curse on this family." Before he could continue his tirade, a sound cut through the air that made him freeze completely. It was not the phone. It was not the police. It was a heavy, ominous knock at the front door. Bam! 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 It shook the frame of the house. It was the kind of knock that didn't ask for permission. It was a demand. Elijah checked his watch. It was past 9 at night. People didn't visit pastors at 9 on a Saturday night, unless they had very bad intentions. He crept towards the window, peering through the curtains. He gasped and stumbled back, his face turning the color of ash. "It is him," he whimpered. "It is Tiny." Tiny was the ironic nickname for the enforcer who worked for Marcus Big T. Thompson. I had never met him, but I had seen his file during an investigation into money laundering at the local barbershops. He was 6'5", 300 pounds of muscle, and had a reputation for breaking femurs with a baseball bat. The knocking came again, louder this time, accompanied by the sound of the doorbell being held down continuously. Rev opened the door, a deep voice boomed from the porch. "We know you are in there. We saw the lights." Elijah looked around for a weapon. He grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the mantel. He looked at the back door, considering running. But he knew he couldn't outrun Tiny. He looked at me, and then a new desperation entered his eyes. He put the candlestick down. He smoothed his shirt. He put on his best grieving father face. He walked to the door and opened it just a crack. "Brother Tiny Elijah," said his voice cracking, "this is a house of mourning. My daughter." The door was kicked open. It slammed against the wall with a deafening crash, splintering the wood frame. Tiny walked in. He had to duck to clear the doorframe. He wore a black leather jacket and a diamond stud in his ear that caught the light. He looked around the living room, his eyes scanning the expensive furniture, the spilled scotch, and finally resting on the hospital bed in the corner. "We heard about the accident," Reverend Tiny said, his voice low and rumbling like a diesel engine. "Big T sends his condolences." "Thank you," Elijah said, backing away, hands raised. "Thank you. We are devastated." Tiny took a step forward, closing the distance. He smelled of cigar smoke and intimidation. "Big T also heard you were trying to move some money around tonight," Tiny said. "He heard some accounts were getting frozen. He got worried, Reverend. He got worried that maybe his 100 grand was getting frozen too." No, Elijah stammered. "That is a misunderstanding. A banking glitch. I have the money. It is secured." "Show me," Tiny said, holding out a hand the size of a shovel. I can't access it until Monday," Elijah lied, sweating profusely. "It is in a trust. It releases upon her death." He pointed at me. Tiny walked over to the bed. He looked down at me. I stared up at him, keeping my eyes unfocused, my mouth slightly open. I was playing the role of the vegetable perfectly. "She looks alive to me," Tiny said. "She is brain dead," Elijah said quickly, rushing to my side. He put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it hard. "The machines are the only thing keeping her heart beating. We are taking her off life support tomorrow night. Sunday. The Lord's Day. As soon as she passes, the insurance policy pays out. $2 million. Tiny. I will have the cash for Big T on Monday morning, I swear on my life." Tiny looked from Elijah to me, then back to Elijah. He reached into his jacket. Elijah flinched, thinking it was a gun. Tiny pulled out a switchblade. He flicked it open, the blade gleaming silver. He leaned down and placed the cold, flat side of the blade against my cheek. I felt the metal against my skin. It was freezing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo, but I forced my body to remain limp. If I flinched now, if I showed fear, he would know I was awake. And if he knew I was awake, he might decide to speed up the process for Elijah. "She doesn't feel that," Elijah asked, his voice trembling. "No," Elijah whispered. "She feels nothing. She is gone." Tiny dragged the blade slowly down my cheek to my neck, resting it on my jugular. "You better hope she expires on schedule," Reverend Tiny said. "Because Big T is not a patient man. If we don't have our money by noon on Monday, we are going to take it out in trade. Maybe we take this house. Maybe we take your car. Or maybe—" He pressed the blade slightly harder, not enough to cut, but enough to leave a mark. "Maybe we take a few fingers off the Reverend. Preaching is hard without hands." He retracted the blade and stood up. "Monday noon," Tiny said. "Or you meet God early." He turned and walked out, leaving the front door broken and swinging in the wind. Elijah collapsed onto the floor. He didn't rush to check on me. He didn't check to see if the knife had cut me. He just sat there on the expensive Persian rug, weeping into his hands, rocking back and forth. "Monday," he sobbed. "I need her to die by Monday." I lay there listening to the wind howl through the broken door. My cheek burned where the knife had touched me, but inside I was ice cold. He had used me as a shield. He had bargained with my life to a gangster. He was not a father. He was a parasite, and parasites had to be removed. Elijah stood up shakily. He went to the liquor cabinet and grabbed the bottle of scotch, drinking straight from the neck. He wiped his mouth and looked at me with a gaze that was no longer just greedy. It was murderous. He was thinking about the pillow. I could see it in his eyes. He was thinking about how easy it would be to just place a pillow over my face tonight and blame it on the trauma. But he was too cowardly. He needed it to look natural for the insurance. He needed to wait. He stumbled upstairs to his bedroom, slamming the door. I was alone again. The clock on the wall ticked. It was 10 p.m. The house was quiet, but the network was active. While Elijah had been cowering before the loan shark, I had been busy. My internal clock told me it was time for the next phase. Elijah thought his biggest problem was the money he owed Big T. He was wrong. His biggest problem was the reputation he had spent 30 years building. The church was his shield, his source of income, and his ego. I focused on the mental image of the email I had drafted weeks ago as a failsafe. It was sitting in the outbox of a secure server scheduled to deploy if I didn't enter a reset code by 10:05 p.m. I watched the digital clock on the cable box. 10:04, 10:05. Sent. Somewhere in the cloud, an encrypted packet of data was flying towards the inboxes of the 12 Board of Elders of the Greater Antioch Baptist Church. The subject line was simple: urgent financial audit and missing building fund. Inside that email, attached as a PDF, was a forensic accounting report I had compiled over the last 6 months. It detailed every check Elijah had written to consultants that were actually shell companies for casinos in Gary, Indiana. It showed the wire transfers from the orphanage fund to his personal gambling accounts. It showed the dates, the times, and the amounts. It was irrefutable. It was damning. And it was going to be read by the deacon board right before Sunday service tomorrow morning. Elijah was upstairs passing out from fear and alcohol, dreaming of a $2 million check. He didn't know that when he woke up tomorrow, he wouldn't be standing in the pulpit. He would be standing in the ruins of his life. I closed my eyes. The first domino had fallen with Darius. The second domino had just been tipped with the church. Tomorrow was Sunday, the Lord's Day, and judgment was coming. Sunday morning in Chicago usually meant the sound of gospel music drifting from passing cars and the smell of bacon frying in the kitchen, but in the Brooks household, it smelled like fear. The sun was streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the wreckage of the night before. Elijah was up early. He was standing in front of the hallway mirror trying to tie his tie with trembling hands. He had put on his best suit, a navy blue three-piece custom-tailored number that cost more than most of his parishioners made in a month. He was trying to armor himself. He believed that if he looked like the pastor of Greater Antioch Baptist Church, he could still command the respect that title carried. He believed he could walk into the pulpit in 2 hours, preach a sermon about forgiveness, and somehow talk his way out of the hole he had dug. He did not look at me. I was still lying in the hospital bed in the corner of the living room, a silent witness to his unraveling. He had covered me with a clean sheet, trying to hide the evidence of his neglect. He was humming a hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness," but his voice cracked on the high notes. It was a performance. Everything about my father was a performance. Then the cars arrived. It was not the police. It was something far worse for a man like Elijah. It was a procession of black Lincolns and Cadillacs pulling into the driveway one after another. I heard the heavy thud of car doors closing. I heard the murmur of deep, serious voices. Elijah froze. His hands dropped from his tie. He walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. "Oh, God," he whispered. "It is the board." He turned to run upstairs, but it was too late. The doorbell did not ring. The front door simply opened. Darius and Sarah had left it unlocked after their joyride disaster, and the lock was broken from Tiny's visit anyway. 5 men walked into the living room. They were the pillars of the community: Deacon Moss, Elder Thomas, Trustee Williams, men in their 60s and 70s with gray hair and faces carved from granite. These were men who had known me since I was a baby. Men who had carried me on their shoulders at church picnics. Men who had trusted my father with their souls and their tithes. Elijah plastered a smile on his face. It was a ghastly expression, like a skull grinning. "Deacon Moss," he boomed, spreading his arms. "What a surprise! I was just getting ready for service. To what do I owe this honor before breakfast?" Deacon Moss did not smile. He did not step forward to shake Elijah's hand. He stood in the center of the room, leaning on his cane, his eyes cold and hard. "There will be no service for you today, Elijah," Deacon Moss said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. Elijah laughed nervously. "Come now, Deacon, what is this about? Is it about the roof repairs? I told you I am securing the contractor this week." Elder Thomas stepped forward. He was the church treasurer, a man who pinched every penny and kept the books with an iron fist. In his hand he held a stack of papers. They were thick. They were stapled. And I recognized the font immediately. It was the forensic audit report I had emailed 10 hours ago. "We got an email this morning," Elijah Elder Thomas said. "An anonymous email. But the documents attached were very specific." Elijah's face went gray. He backed up until his legs hit the edge of the sofa. "Email," he stammered. "You know anyone can fake an email these days. It is the enemy. The devil is trying to attack the leadership. You have to have discernment, brothers." Elder Thomas threw the papers onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy slap, sliding across the polished wood and coming to a rest right next to Sarah's half-eaten pizza box from the night before. "These are bank records," Elijah Elder Thomas shouted, losing his composure. "Certified wire transfers. We called the bank manager at home this morning. He confirmed the transaction codes." Deacon Moss pointed a shaking finger at the papers. $500,000, Elijah. That was the Hope Fund. That was money for the orphanage extension, money that Widow Jenkins gave from her pension, money that the children raised selling candy bars. And where did it go, Elijah? Elder Thomas demanded. Did it go to the contractors? Did it go to the lumber yard? No, it went to a shell company in Gary, Indiana. A shell company that lists its primary address as the loading dock of the Lucky Strike Casino. Elijah fell to his knees. It was theatrical, but it was also desperate. He grabbed Deacon Moss's hand, but the deacon snatched it away as if he had been burned. Brothers, please, Elijah begged, tears streaming down his face. I had a system. I was going to double it. The church needs a new roof. The church needs a new van. I was trying to multiply the talents like the servant in the Bible. I did it for the glory of God. Do not you dare quote scripture to me. Deacon Moss roared, his voice shaking the walls. You gambled away the widow's mites. You stole from orphans to feed your addiction. You are not a shepherd, Elijah. You are a wolf in a $3,000 suit. The room fell silent. The only sound was Elijah's ragged breathing and the steady beep of my heart monitor. The deacons looked over at me then. For the first time, they acknowledged my presence. Deacon Moss took off his hat and held it over his heart. He walked over to my bedside. I am so sorry, Zora, he whispered, looking down at me. I am so sorry we did not see it sooner. We thought he was a good man. We failed you, child. I wanted to reach out and squeeze his hand. I wanted to tell him that he had not failed me, that he was the instrument of my justice. But I remained still. Elder Thomas turned back to Elijah, who was still kneeling on the floor. We have already called an emergency vote, Elder Thomas said. You are removed effective immediately. You are stripped of your ordination. You are banned from the premises of Greater Antioch Baptist Church. If you set foot on the property for service today, the ushers have instructions to remove you by force. Elijah looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You can't do that. I built that church. That is my church. It is God's church, Deacon Moss corrected him. And you are done. We will be conducting a full forensic audit starting tomorrow. If there is one more dime missing, Elijah, and we know there is, we are handing this file to the district attorney. Hand over the keys, Elder Thomas demanded, extending his hand. The church keys, the credit card, and the keys to the parsonage. You have 30 days to vacate the house. Elijah trembled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. He dropped them into Elder Thomas's hand. It was the sound of his power evaporating. We will pray for your soul, Elijah, Deacon Moss said, turning to leave. But we will not pay for your sins. They turned and walked out, leaving the front door open behind them. They marched back to their cars, leaving my father kneeling on the floor, stripped of his title, his income, and his dignity. Elijah stayed on the floor for a long time. He did not move. He stared at the spot where the deacons had stood. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. Then a movement caught my eye. Sarah was standing at the top of the stairs. She had been listening. She was wearing her silk pajamas, her hair in a messy bun. She looked from Elijah's crumpled form to the stack of incriminating bank statements on the table. She did the math instantly. No church means no salary. No salary means no bills paid. Darius was in jail. Elijah was about to be prosecuted for embezzlement. The gravy train had not just derailed, it had exploded. She ran down the stairs, not to comfort Elijah, but to the kitchen. I heard her rummaging through the drawers. She came back into the living room holding a roll of trash bags. She did not look at me. She did not look at Elijah. She started grabbing things. The silver candlesticks, the iPad, my expensive noise-canceling headphones that were sitting on the shelf. What are you doing? Elijah whispered, looking up at her. I am leaving, Sarah spat. I am not going down with this ship, Elijah. You people are crazy. Stealing from orphans. Drugs in the car. I have a reputation to think of. She shoved a crystal vase into the trash bag. You can't leave, Elijah said, standing up shakily. Darius needs you. We need to stick together. Stick together? Sarah laughed a harsh, hysterical sound. With what money, Elijah? You are broke. You are worse than broke, you are going to prison. I am going back to my mother's house. And I am taking what I am owed for putting up with this family. She ran back upstairs. I heard the sound of drawers being ripped open. She was packing. But she wasn't just packing her clothes. She was looting. I lay there and I realized something. She was going to go into my room. My bedroom door had a biometric lock, but Elijah had disabled it when they brought me home so they could access the ensuite bathroom. It was wide open. Inside my room was a wall safe hidden behind a painting. Sarah knew about it. She had seen me open it once years ago. She knew that was where I kept my emergency cash and my vintage jewelry collection. But she did not know what else was in that room. I listened to her footsteps stomping around above my head. Then silence. She was in my room. I switched my mental focus. I could not see her from the living room, but I knew the layout of my bedroom perfectly. On the bookshelf directly across from the safe sat a vintage teddy bear. It was a stiff bear worth a fortune on its own, but its real value was in its left eye. Inside that glass eye was a pinhole camera with a wide-angle lens. It was positioned specifically to catch anyone tampering with the safe. I imagined Sarah standing there right now. She would be frantic. She would be pulling the painting off the wall. She would see the safe. She would try the code. She probably knew the old code, 0904, my birthday. But I had changed the code remotely last night. The safe would not open. I could picture her rage. She would be looking around for something to pry it open with, a letter opener, a heavy lamp, and then she would feel it, the sense of being watched. Back in the living room, Elijah had crawled back to the liquor bottle. He was oblivious. But upstairs, the final act of the morning drama was playing out. I heard a scream from upstairs. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of discovery. "Zora, you witch!" Sarah screamed from the second floor. She came thundering down the stairs a moment later. She was holding the teddy bear. She had ripped its head open. Wires dangled from the neck. She held the glass eye in her hand, the small black lens clearly visible. She ran into the living room, breathing hard, her eyes wild. She threw the bear at Elijah. "Look at this," she shrieked. "Look at this, Elijah!" Elijah looked at the decapitated bear, confused. "What is that?" "It is a camera," Sarah yelled, pointing at the lens. It was in her room, pointed right at the safe. "It has a blinking light, Elijah. It is recording." She turned slowly and looked at me. The realization washed over her face like a bucket of ice water. "It wasn't just in the bedroom, was it?" she whispered, walking towards me. She looked around the living room, scanning the shelves, the smoke detectors, the motion sensors. She grabbed a chair and dragged it to the center of the room, climbing up to inspect the smoke detector. She ripped it off the ceiling. There inside the plastic casing was a small red light pulsing rhythmically. "She is recording us," Sarah whispered. She dropped the smoke detector. It shattered on the floor. "She has been recording everything, the drug talk, the money, the lawyer, the will." Elijah stood up. The alcohol seemed to evaporate from his system, leaving only cold terror. Everything he asked, everything Sarah screamed. Since she got here. She knows. She knows we didn't call the ambulance right away. She knows about the brake line talk. She knows about the forgery. Sarah backed away from the bed, looking at me with pure horror. "She is not a vegetable," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "She is a trap." Elijah walked towards me. He looked different now. The pathetic, broken man was gone. In his place was the man who had cut my brake lines, the man who had signed a DNR to save money. He looked at the camera on the floor, then he looked at me. "Is it true, Zora?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you in there?" I decided it was time. I had the footage of the deacons firing him. I had the footage of Sarah looting. I had the footage of the forgery. The cloud server was full. I did not move my body. Not yet. But I did something I had not done in 3 days. I opened my eyes fully. I cleared the fog from my gaze, and I looked him dead in the eye. Then slowly, deliberately, I winked. Elijah gasped, stumbling back as if I had punched him. "She is awake!" he screamed. "Kill her! Kill her now before she talks." Sarah looked at him, then at the door. "No way," Sarah said, backing up. "I am not adding murder to this. I am out." She grabbed her trash bags of loot and ran for the door. "Sarah, wait!" Elijah yelled. But she was gone. The front door slammed shut. It was just me and Elijah. The house was silent again, but the air was electric with violence. He looked at the front door, then he looked at me. He realized he was alone. No witnesses, no deacons, no Sarah, just him and the daughter who knew too much. He picked up a heavy throw pillow from the sofa. He tested its weight in his hands. "Monday is too far away," he whispered, walking towards me. "The insurance pays out on accidental death, too. Maybe you just stopped breathing in your sleep." He raised the pillow. I tensed my muscles. My right arm was ready. My left leg was ready. The paralysis was gone. "Come on, Daddy," I thought. "Come a little closer. Let's see who is stronger. The man who relies on luck, or the woman who relies on preparation." He lunged. Sarah stood there clutching the severed head of the teddy bear, her chest heaving with a mixture of exertion and dawning horror. For a moment the room was dead silent save for the rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor, which I kept steady through sheer force of will. I watched her through my half-closed lashes, waiting for the fear to set in. Most people, when they realize they are being recorded committing a crime, will run. They will panic. They will try to hide. But Sarah was not most people. She was a narcissist cornered in a trap of her own making, and when narcissists are cornered, they do not flee. They attack. The fear in her eyes hardened into something jagged and ugly. She dropped the bare head onto the floor, the glass eye rolling across the hardwood like a marble. She marched over to my bed, her heels clicking aggressively on the floorboards. "You think you are so smart, don't you?" she hissed. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. I could smell the stale wine on her breath and the expensive perfume she had stolen from my vanity. Her pupils were dilated, trembling with rage. "I know you can hear me, Zora," she screamed. "I know you are in there." She raised her hand, and before I could brace myself, she slapped me. It was not a theatrical slap. It was a vicious, open-handed blow that connected with my cheekbone with a sickening crack. My head snapped to the side. The pain was sharp and hot, radiating through my jaw. My lips split against my teeth, and I tasted the metallic tang of copper. It took every ounce of my training, every shred of my self-control, not to reach up and break her wrist. My fingers twitched under the sheet, wanting to wrap around her throat. But I couldn't. Not yet. The assault had to be completed. The crime had to be absolute. "You bitch!" Sarah shrieked, grabbing my hospital gown and shaking me. "Stop pretending! Wake up! I know you are faking it. Nobody puts a camera in a teddy bear unless they are plotting something. You set us up." She slapped me again, harder this time. "Answer me!" she screamed. I let my head loll back onto the pillow, my eyes unfocused, staring past her at the ceiling. I forced my body to remain limp, a rag doll in the hands of a madwoman. She let go of me, shoving me back against the mattress. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on the smashed smoke detector on the floor, then back to the teddy bear. She ran to the bear and began stomping on the glass eye. She ground her heel into the lens, shattering it into dust. Then she ran to the smoke detector, kicking the plastic casing across the room until the red light stopped blinking. There she panted, looking wild. No more cameras, no more proof. I almost laughed. She really thought destroying the lens would destroy the footage. She was a millennial who lived on her phone, yet she didn't understand the concept of cloud storage. Every second of video, every word she had just screamed, every frame of her assaulting a disabled person had already been uploaded, encrypted, and stored on 3 different servers in 3 different countries. She was just stomping on plastic, while the evidence was already sitting on the desk of the district attorney. Elijah, she screamed, turning toward the stairs. Elijah, get your drunk self down here right now. Elijah appeared at the top of the landing, holding the banister for support. He looked gray and wasted, the alcohol wearing off, leaving only the hangover and the terror. What is it, Sarah? He asked, his voice slurring. Leave her alone. Let's just go. Get down here, Sarah commanded. You need to see this. Elijah stumbled down the stairs, tripping on the last step. He walked into the living room, looking at the destruction. The smashed electronics, the overturned chair, the blood on my lip. What did you do? He whispered, looking at me. Did you hit her? She is faking it. Elijah, Sarah said, grabbing his lapels and shaking him. She has cameras, hidden cameras, everywhere. In the bear, in the smoke detector. She has been watching us. Elijah blinked, trying to process the information. Watching us. Yes, you idiot, Sarah yelled. She has us on tape. She has you admitting to the brake lines. She has the forgery. She has the drugs. She has everything. Elijah looked at the smashed pieces of the camera on the floor. His face went from confusion to a pale mask of horror. But she is in a coma, he whispered. The doctor said. The doctor was wrong, or she paid him off, Sarah interrupted. It doesn't matter. What matters is that if she wakes up, if she hands those tapes to the police, we are not just losing the house, Elijah. We are going to prison for the rest of our lives. Do you understand? Kidnapping, fraud, attempted murder. Elijah swayed on his feet. He looked at me, his eyes wide. He was seeing his life end. He was seeing the prison cell, the orange jumpsuit, the shame. We have to leave, he stammered. We have to run, maybe Mexico, and go where Sarah spat. You have no money. Your accounts are frozen. My cards are maxed out. We can't run, Elijah. We can't hide. She walked over to him, her voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. There is only one way out of this. Elijah looked at her, shaking his head. No, I can't. She is my daughter. She is not your daughter anymore, Sarah said, her voice cold as ice. She is a witness. She is the prosecution. Look at her, Elijah. She hates you. She set this whole thing up to destroy you. She wants you to die in a cage. Are you going to let her win? Elijah looked at me. I kept my gaze blank, my face devoid of emotion, but inside I was screaming at him. Look at me, Dad. Look at what you made me become. He looked at the blood on my lip. He looked at the papers on the table that had cost him his church. He looked at his own reflection in the mirror. A broken, ruined man. What do we do? He whispered. We finish it, Sarah said. Tonight. Right now. Before the police come back. Before she decides to stop playing possum. But how? Elijah asked. The pillow. It is too messy. They will see the signs of struggle. Think, Elijah, Sarah hissed. You are a diabetic. You have insulin in the fridge. High-grade, fast-acting insulin. Elijah's eyes widened. Insulin. If you inject a healthy person with a massive dose of insulin, Sarah explained, her voice taking on a chillingly clinical tone, their blood sugar drops to 0. They go into hypoglycemic shock, seizures, coma, and then the heart stops. And the autopsy? Elijah asked. It disappears from the system quickly, Sarah said. If they find her dead, they will assume her body just gave out from the trauma of the accident, or they will think it was a medical error at the hospital. Nobody looks for insulin in a non-diabetic. It is the perfect crime. Elijah looked at his hands. The hands that had held a Bible for 30 years were now considering the tools of execution. I have a fresh box, he muttered. In the butter tray. Get it, Sarah ordered. Elijah hesitated. He looked at me one last time. He was looking for a sign of forgiveness. He was looking for a reason to stop. I gave him nothing. I was the abyss staring back. He turned and walked into the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open. I heard the rattle of the glass vial. I heard the plastic wrapper of a sterile syringe being torn open. He came back into the living room holding the needle. His hands were shaking so badly I thought he might drop it. Sarah stood by my head acting as the lookout, though there was no one to watch out for. "Do it," she whispered. Elijah walked to the side of the bed. He held the syringe up to the light, checking for air bubbles. It was a habit, a reflex from years of treating his own condition. Even in murder, he was meticulous. "God will forgive me," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling. "God knows my heart. He knows I was pushed. He knows I didn't want this." He looked down at me, a tear leaking from his eye. "I am sorry, Zora," he said softly. "I really am. But I can't go to jail. I am too old for jail." He reached for my arm. He was looking for a vein. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. This was it. This was the line. Once that needle touched my skin, there was no going back. He would have crossed the threshold from negligent father to active murderer. I needed him to touch me. I needed the physical contact to justify what I was about to do. Self-defense laws in Illinois are very specific. You can use lethal force only if you believe your life is in imminent danger. A needle full of insulin aimed at my vein was as imminent as it got. I waited. I let him swab my inner elbow with a wet wipe he had pulled from his pocket. The cold alcohol stung. He positioned the needle. "Just a little pinch, baby girl," he whispered, just like he used to when I was a child getting a flu shot. He began to lower the needle. "Now!" The command screamed through my nervous system. I didn't just wake up, I exploded. My right hand, the hand he thought was paralyzed, shot up with the speed of a striking cobra. I grabbed his wrist just as the needle tip grazed my skin. Elijah gasped, his eyes bulging. I squeezed. I squeezed with all the rage of 35 years of neglect. I squeezed until I felt the bones in his wrist grind together. He dropped the syringe. It fell onto the bedsheets harmlessly. I sat up. The motion was sudden, violent, and terrified them both. I ripped the oxygen tube from my nose and threw it aside. Elijah stumbled back, clutching his wrist, looking at me as if I were a demon rising from the pit of hell. Sarah screamed, a short, sharp sound of pure terror, backing into the wall. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. My legs were shaky from days of inactivity, but adrenaline is a powerful stabilizer. I stood to my full height, towering over my father, who was now cowering by the sofa. I wiped the blood from my lip where Sarah had slapped me. I looked at the blood on my thumb. Then I looked at them. "You wanted a vegetable?" I said, my voice raspy from disuse but cold as the grave. "You got a witness." Elijah fell to his knees, not in prayer but in shock. "Zora," he wheezed. "Zora, please." "Save it," I said, stepping over the fallen syringe. I looked at Sarah. She was eyeing the door, measuring the distance. "Don't even think about it, Sarah," I said. "The doors are magnetically locked. I engaged the protocol when you went into the kitchen. Nobody leaves this house until the police arrive." "Police?" Elijah whimpered. "They are already on their way," I said. "And this time, Daddy, they aren't coming for Darius. They are coming for the man who just tried to execute his daughter in her own living room." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. I held it up, showing them the screen. It was still recording. "Smile," I said. "You are on candid camera, and this is the season finale." Sarah slid down the wall, burying her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically. Elijah just stared at the needle on the bed, the instrument of his damnation. The sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder with every second. To them, it was the sound of doom. To me, it was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The snake had been revealed. The trap had been sprung. And now the extermination could begin. The storm outside had turned Chicago into a weeping gray ghost. Rain lashed against the bay windows of my living room with the force of gravel being thrown by an angry hand. Thunder rattled the window panes, vibrating through the floorboards and up into the frame of the hospital bed where I lay. It was the perfect cover. Nature was providing the soundtrack for a murder, and my father was preparing to take the lead solo. I watched them through the slit of my eyelids. The room was dim, lit only by the flash of lightning and the low lamp on the side table. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the walls, making Elijah look less like a man and more like a looming predator. He stood by the bedside holding the syringe. The liquid inside was clear. Humalog. Fast-acting insulin. In a diabetic, it regulated blood sugar. In a healthy person with a normal glucose level, it was a chemical weapon. A massive dose would strip the sugar from my blood within minutes, sending my brain into starvation mode. Seizures would follow, then coma, then death, and the best part for them was that it would leave no trace. Insulin breaks down naturally in the body. By the time the coroner cut me open, it would be gone. Sarah stood behind him near the door, keeping watch. She was shivering, hugging herself, her silk pajamas damp with sweat. She looked terrified, but she did not move to stop him. That was the thing about Sarah. She wanted the outcome, she just didn't want the blood on her hands. She wanted the money, the house, the lifestyle. But she wanted Elijah to be the one to plunge the dagger. "Do it, Dad." Sarah whispered, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Do it before the power goes out." Elijah did not answer her immediately. He was staring at the needle, flicking it with his fingernail to remove an air bubble. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. He looked at me, and for a second I thought he might stop. I thought the weight of 35 years of fatherhood might crash down on him. I thought he might remember the time he taught me to tie my shoes, or the time he sat in the front row of my college graduation. But then he spoke, and I realized that the father I remembered had died a long time ago. "You left me no choice, Zora," he said softly. He wasn't talking to Sarah. He was talking to me. He was pleading his case to the victim he was about to execute. "I did everything for this family." He continued, his voice gaining strength. "I preached every Sunday. I shook every hand. I built that church from a storefront to a sanctuary. And what did I get? Debts, ungrateful deacons, a son who can't find his way, and a daughter who thinks she is better than her own blood." He took a step closer. I could smell him now. The stale scotch had evaporated, replaced by the sour metallic scent of fear and the rubbing alcohol he had used to wipe my arm. "You are selfish, Zora," he spat. "You have millions sitting in accounts doing nothing, just numbers on a screen. And you watch your family struggle, you watch me drown. You could have written one check, and all of this would have gone away. But no. You had to have your principles. You had to lecture me about stewardship." He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Well, look where your principles got you, baby girl. You are lying in a diaper in the corner of a living room you don't even own anymore. And I am the one holding the power." I lay there frozen, not by paralysis but by calculation. My mind was racing, screaming at my body to move, to fight, to run. Every instinct in my reptilian brain was shouting danger, danger, danger. But my frontal lobe, the forensic accountant side of me, was holding the leash. I could not move yet. Not yet. In the state of Illinois, conspiracy to commit murder carries a heavy sentence, but it is hard to prove without a confession. Attempted murder is better, but a good lawyer could argue he never intended to inject me, that he was just scaring me, or that he was confused by his own diabetic condition. I needed the actus reus, the guilty act. I needed the needle to touch my skin. I needed the intent to become physical. I needed him to initiate the injection. Only then would the trap be inescapable. Only then would he be gone forever. So I waited. I stopped breathing. I slowed my heart rate using the meditation techniques I had learned to deal with the stress of my job. Thump, thump, thump. Elijah uncapped the needle. The silver tip glinted in the lamplight. "It is better this way," he whispered. "You are already gone, Zora. The doctor said so. I am just helping you along. I am being a merciful father." He grabbed my left arm. His grip was rough. He didn't bother to be gentle this time. He squeezed my bicep to bulge the vein. Sarah turned away, unable to watch. "Just hurry up," she whimpered. Elijah positioned the needle over the soft skin of my inner elbow. "This is for us," he said. "For the family." I watched the needle descend. It moved in slow motion. I could see the microscopic drop of insulin beating at the tip. Outside, far in the distance, I heard a sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over the thunder. A wail, a siren, then another, and another. They were coming. The automatic email to the church elders had triggered a call to the police. The fraud alert on my bank account had triggered the FBI. The tampering with the G-Wagon had triggered the state troopers. My house was converging into the epicenter of law enforcement for the entire county. But Elijah did not hear them. He was in a trance. He was focused entirely on the small patch of skin on my arm. He was focused on the $2 million that would hit his account on Monday morning. Tunnel vision had blinded him to everything but his own greed. The siren grew louder, rising and falling like a mournful ghost. Sarah heard it. Her head snapped up. "Dad," she hissed. "Dad, listen." Elijah ignored her. He was millimeters away. "Dad, it is the cops," Sarah screamed. "Stop. We have to go." "No," Elijah roared. "Almost there. Almost free." He thrust his hand downward. I felt the cold point of the needle prick the surface of my skin, a tiny sharp sting. Tiny. That was it. The line was crossed, the crime was committed, and the dormant volcano that was Zora Brooks erupted. My eyes snapped open, not halfway, not groggy, wide, terrifyingly awake. I locked eyes with him. In that split second, I saw his soul crumble. I saw the realization hit him like a freight train. The vegetable was looking back. The victim was present. Elijah gasped, his breath hitching in a strangled squeak. Before he could push the plunger, before he could inject the poison, my left hand flew up. I am not left-handed, but adrenaline does not care about dominance. I grabbed his wrist, the one holding the syringe. My fingers wrapped around his bone like steel bands. I squeezed. I heard the distinct crunch of cartilage grinding against cartilage. Elijah screamed. It was a high-pitched sound, a sound of pure shock and pain. I did not let go. I dug my nails into his skin, drawing blood. With a strength I did not know I possessed, I twisted his arm backward. The syringe flew from his hand. It spun through the air, end over end, glistening in the lamplight, before embedding itself in the expensive fabric of the sofa like a dart. Elijah stumbled back, trying to pull away, but I held on. I used his momentum to pull myself up. I rose from the bed like a corpse sitting up in a coffin. "You missed," I whispered. My voice was raspy, dry from days of disuse, but it cut through the room louder than the thunder. Elijah stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at his wrist, which was already bruising under my grip. He looked at my eyes, which were burning with cold blue fire. "Zora," he stammered, You are awake." I released his wrist and shoved him. He fell backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on the floor next to Sarah. Sarah was pressed against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. She looked at me, then at the door, then back at me, realizing there was nowhere to run. "You thought I was asleep," I said, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. I stood up. My knees wobbled for a second, then locked into place. I ripped the IV line out of my hand, blood dripping onto the floor, but I didn't feel it. "You thought I was brain dead because it made it easier for you," I said, walking slowly toward them. "It is easier to rob a vegetable, isn't it, Dad? It is easier to kill a daughter who can't scream." Elijah scrambled backward on the floor, crab walking away from me. "No, Zora, listen," he begged, holding up his hands. "It was mercy. I was doing it for mercy. The doctor said you were suffering." "Liar," I roared. The sound tore at my throat, but it felt good. It felt like freedom. I tapped the side of my head. I heard everything I said. I heard the brake lines. I heard the DNR. I heard the insurance talk. I heard you sell my future to a loan shark. And I heard you pray to God for my death. I reached into the pocket of my hospital gown and pulled out my phone. The screen was glowing, showing the recording timer still ticking. And now I said, holding the phone up, the whole world is going to hear it too. Outside, the sirens cut abruptly. Tires screeched on the pavement. Car doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. Blue and red lights flooded through the window, painting us all in the colors of the law. Police open up, a voice boomed from the porch. Elijah looked at the window, then at me. He realized the game was over. The check was never coming. The house was gone. The reputation was ash. He slumped against the wall, defeat washing over him. Why, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Why didn't you just die? It would have been so much simpler. I looked down at him, the man who had given me life, and then tried to steal it back. Because, Dad, I said, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I had to audit your books first, and you are officially bankrupt. The front door smashed open. The front door had been kicked in, but the chaos outside was nothing compared to the storm I had just unleashed inside. Elijah was still scrambling backward on the expensive Persian rug, his eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on me, as if I were a corpse that had clawed its way out of the grave. He had spent the last 3 days praying for my death, but he never expected the resurrection. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear anymore, but from the pure, unadulterated rush of victory. The I-fi line was still taped to the back of my hand, a plastic tether to the lie I had been living. I looked at it with disgust. With a savage jerk, I ripped the tape and the needle from my vein. Blood welled up dark and crimson, dripping onto the pristine white sheets, but I did not feel the pain. I felt only the release. "Get your hands off me," I screamed. The voice that came out of my throat was not the weak whisper of a patient. It was a command. It was the voice of a prosecutor closing a case. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings, bouncing around the room and slamming into Elijah and Sarah with physical force. They recoiled, as if I had struck them. Elijah let out a strangled cry, throwing his hands up to shield his face. In his twisted, guilt-ridden mind, he did not see his daughter. He saw a vengeful spirit. He saw the consequences of his sins rising up to drag him to hell. Sarah shrieked, scrambling until her back hit the fireplace, her perfectly manicured nails clawing at the bricks as if she could dig a hole through the masonry and escape. "You are dead." Elijah gibbered, his voice high and thin with hysteria. "You are supposed to be dead. The insulin, the crash. You are dead." "I am the most alive person in this room," I said, swinging my legs fully off the bed. My feet touched the cold hardwood floor. My knees trembled slightly from the muscle atrophy of lying still for 72 hours, but I locked them into place. I would not fall. I would not falter, not in front of them. Before Elijah could process the reality that his victim was standing up, the hallway exploded with noise and movement. "Police, get on the ground. Now." The shout came from everywhere at once. Uniformed officers poured into the living room, their weapons drawn, their tactical lights cutting through the dim interior like laser beams. They moved with the precision of a pack of wolves swarming the space, shouting commands that layered over each other in a chaotic symphony of justice. "Drop it. Hands in the air. Face down." James Sterling was right behind them. My lawyer. My friend. He looked immaculate even in the middle of a raid, his trench coat sweeping behind him like a cape. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding his phone connected to the listening device I had been wearing. He had heard every word. He had heard the threat. He had heard the struggle. And he had given the signal to breach. James pointed straight at Elijah. "That is him!" James shouted over the noise. "That is the man! He has a weapon! Secure the syringe!" 2 officers tackled Elijah. They did not treat him like a community leader. They did not treat him like a grieving father. They hit him with the full force of the law, slamming him face first into the floorboards. I heard the air leave his lungs in a painful whoosh. The man who had demanded respect his entire life was now tasting dust and boot polish. "Ow, my arm!" Elijah wailed. "Do not hurt me. I am a pastor. You are a suspect under arrest for attempted murder." An officer barked, twisting Elijah's arms behind his back. I watched as the steel handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Click, click. The sound was final. It was the period at the end of his sentence. Across the room, Sarah was trying to play the victim one last time. She had thrown her hands up, crying hysterically, her mascara running down her face in black rivulets. "Don't shoot!" she screamed. "I didn't do it. It was him. He forced me. I tried to stop him. Officers, secure her," James ordered, pointing a finger at Sarah. "She is an accessory before and after the fact. And check her pockets. She has stolen property." Sarah screamed as a female officer grabbed her, slamming her against the wall to frisk her. "He is lying!" Sarah yelled, thrashing. "Zora, tell them I tried to save you." I just looked at her. I didn't say a word. My silence was her conviction. An evidence technician moved in quickly, locating the syringe that I had knocked from Elijah's hand. He photographed it where it stuck out of the sofa cushion like a poisonous dart, then carefully placed it into a plastic biohazard tube. That tube contained enough insulin to kill a horse, and Elijah's fingerprints were all over it. It was the nail in his coffin. The room began to settle into the controlled chaos of a crime scene. The officers hauled Elijah and Sarah to their feet. They looked small now, pathetic. Elijah's suit was rumpled and covered in dust. His eyes were darting around wildly, looking for an exit, looking for a miracle that wasn't coming. James walked over to me. He didn't hug me. He knew I needed space. He just handed me a sterile gauze pad for my bleeding hand. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I pressed the gauze to my hand. "I am better than okay, James. I am finished." James nodded. "We got it all, Zora. The audio is crystal clear. The brake line admission. The fraud. The insulin. It is a slam dunk. They are never seeing daylight again." I took a deep breath, inhaling the air that no longer smelled of my father's cheap cologne or Sarah's cloying perfume. It smelled of rain and justice. "Hold them a second," I said to the officers who were dragging Elijah toward the door. The officers stopped. Elijah looked up at me. His face was a mask of confusion and betrayal. He still didn't understand. He still thought he was the victim. "Zora," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Zora, tell them to stop. This is a mistake. I am your father. I raised you. You can't let them take me to jail. Think about the church. Think about the family name." I took a step forward. My legs held. I felt stronger with every inch I closed between us. I walked until I was standing right in front of him. I looked down at the man who had loomed over me my entire life, the man whose approval I had spent 35 years trying to buy. He looked so small. "The family name," I asked, my voice calm and deadly. "You destroyed the family name the moment you cut the brakes on my car. You destroyed it when you signed that DNR to save a few bucks. You destroyed it tonight when you tried to stick a needle in my arm because you were too greedy to wait for nature to take its course." Elijah shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I was desperate, Zora. You have so much money. You wouldn't even miss it. I just wanted a loan." "It wasn't a loan," I said. "It was a robbery, and you failed." I leaned in closer so only he could hear me. "You know, Dad, you were right about one thing. I do have a lot of money. I have millions. And you wanted that insurance payout so badly. You were counting on that $2 million to save you from Big T." Elijah nodded eagerly, hoping for a reprieve, hoping I would offer to pay his debts even now. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, just pay him, Zora. Pay him and I will disappear. I promise." I smiled. It was a smile that felt like ice cracking. "I am not paying him, Dad, and I am not giving you a dime, but I do have a gift for you, a parting gift." Elijah looked hopeful. "What What is it? I reached into the pocket of the hospital gown. I didn't pull out money. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. The copy of the document Ray, the lawyer, had printed. The one Elijah had forced my thumbprint onto. I unfolded it and held it up to his face. "Do you remember signing this?" I asked. Elijah nodded. "The power of attorney. Ray said it gave me control." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Ray didn't read it, Dad. And neither did you. You were too busy counting your chickens." I pointed to the paragraph at the top. "This isn't a power of attorney," I said. "This is a deed of assumption of debt. When you put your signature on this paper and accepted my thumbprint, you didn't take control of my assets. You took ownership of a shell corporation called Obsidian Ventures." Elijah squinted at the paper, confusion clouding his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, savoring every syllable, "that you are now the sole owner of $5 million in toxic debt. You didn't just inherit my money, Dad. You inherited my losses. Real losses." Elijah's jaw dropped. "$5 million plus interest," I added. "And since you signed it willingly in front of a witness and a notary, it is binding. The bank has already been notified. They aren't just freezing your accounts because of the fraud, Dad. They are seizing everything you own to cover the debt, the parsonage, your car, your pension, even that suit you are wearing." Elijah made a sound like a dying animal, a whimper that started in his chest and died in his throat. "You are bankrupt," I whispered. "You are destitute. You are going to prison with nothing. No money for a lawyer. No money for bail. No money for commissary. You are going to be a pauper in a cage." Elijah's knees gave out. The officers had to hold him up by his armpits. He stared at me with pure, unadulterated horror. It wasn't the handcuffs that broke him. It wasn't the police. It was the money. It was always the money. You tricked me," he gasped. "You are the devil." "No, Dad," I said, stepping back. "I am just the auditor, and I just closed your account." I signaled to the officers, "Get him out of my house." They dragged him away. He was screaming now, screaming about the money, screaming about the debt, screaming my name. But I didn't look back. I watched Sarah get dragged out behind him, still sobbing about her innocence. I watched them disappear into the rainy night, into the back of the squad cars that were flashing blue and red against the wet pavement. James stood beside me. "That was brutal," he said with a tone of professional admiration. "Assuming the debt. That is genius, Zora. Evil, but genius." I looked at my hand where the blood had stopped flowing. "He wanted to sell me for parts, James," I said. "I just made sure he got the bill." The house was quiet now. The storm outside was still raging, but inside the air was clear. The parasites were gone. The infection had been cut out. I was weak. I was bleeding. I was tired. But for the first time in 35 years, I was free. The interrogation room at the precinct was painted a depressing shade of institutional beige that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I sat on one side of the metal table, my hands folded calmly on the surface. On the other side sat Elijah, still wearing his rumpled suit from the morning, but now stripped of his tie, his belt, and his dignity. He looked small, huddled in the plastic chair, his wrists cuffed to the table bar. Next to me sat James, my lawyer, who was arranging a series of documents with the precision of a card dealer. We were not there to negotiate a plea deal. We were there to explain the new reality of Elijah's existence. "You can't do this!" "Zora," Elijah croaked, his voice raw from hours of crying. "You can't let them take everything. The house, the car, my pension. It is all I have." James looked at me and I nodded, giving him permission to proceed. James slid the document across the table, the one with Elijah's thumbprint, still dark and oily on the signature line. "Mr. Brooks," James began, his tone conversational, but sharp as a razor. "When you forced Zora to sign this document, you believed you were executing a power of attorney. You thought you were gaining access to her liquid assets. You were so blinded by greed that you did not even read the header. Elijah stared at the paper as if it were a poisonous snake. This document, James continued, is a deed of assumption of debt. By affixing your signature and accepting Zora's thumbprint as the grantor, you voluntarily agreed to assume full personal liability for the financial obligations of a holding company called Obsidian Ventures. What is Obsidian Ventures? Elijah whispered, looking at me. I leaned forward. It is a shell company, Dad. A trap I built 5 years ago when I first realized you were stealing from me. I knew one day you would try to take it all, so I built a poison pill. Obsidian Ventures holds no assets. It holds only liabilities, specifically $5 million in leveraged real estate futures that went bust in 2008. Elijah's eyes bulged. $5 million, he gasped. That debt has been sitting there dormant, waiting for a guarantor, I explained calmly. I bought the bad debt for pennies on the dollar just to keep it as a weapon. It was worthless to me, but legally it is still a valid obligation. And now it is your obligation. James tapped the paper. As of this morning, when the bank processed this document pursuant to your attempt to access the accounts, they triggered an immediate lien on all your personal property. Under the terms of the assumption, you waived your homestead exemption. Elijah shook his head frantically. No, that is not legal. Ray said it was a power of attorney. Ray is a disbarred alcoholic who didn't read the paperwork. I said, coldness seeping into my voice. And you are a predator who tried to rob a coma patient. The law does not protect people who sign contracts in bad faith, Elijah, especially when they are caught on video committing fraud while doing it. I watched the realization wash over him. It was not just the prison sentence that terrified him. It was the poverty. Elijah was a man who defined himself by his possessions, his suits, his car, his house. The bank has already seized your accounts. James listed off the damages without looking up. Your checking account had $4,000. Gone. Your savings had $10,000. Gone. Your church pension fund, which you illegally dipped into, has been frozen and will be liquidated to pay back the embezzlement victims first, then the rest goes to Obsidian Ventures. And the house, Elijah asked, his voice barely audible. The parsonage. Foreclosed, I said. The sheriff is putting a padlock on it this afternoon. Everything inside is being auctioned off. The furniture, the electronics, even your collection of silk robes. It is all going to pay down the interest on the debt you just adopted. Elijah slumped forward, his forehead hitting the cold metal table. I am ruined, he sobbed. I am going to prison with nothing. You are going to prison a pauper, I corrected him. And when you get out in 20 years, you will still owe $4.9 million. You will never own a credit card again. You will never own a car. You will never own a home. You will be destitute for the rest of your miserable life. He looked up at me, hatred and sorrow warring in his eyes. Why, Zora? Why did you have to take it all? Because you tried to take my life, I said simply. You signed a paper to kill me to save money. I signed a paper to bankrupt you to save myself. It seems like a fair trade. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. Enjoy the public defender, Dad, I said, walking toward the door. I hear they are very overworked. We left him weeping in the interrogation room, a man who had walked in expecting a fortune and walked out with a debt that would outlive him. Down the hall, the situation for the rest of the family was no better. Sarah was being processed in the booking area. I stopped by the one-way glass to watch. She was stripped of her jewelry, her wig, and her expensive makeup. She looked plain and terrified. Detectives were charging her with assault on a disabled person, conspiracy to commit murder, and grand larceny for the items she stole from my house. The video footage of her slapping me while I lay helpless was playing on a loop on the detective's monitor. Every time the slap landed, the detective shook his head in disgust. There is a special place in prison for people who abuse the vulnerable, and Sarah was about to find out exactly where that was. She would not be eligible for bail. Her husband was in jail for drugs. Her father-in-law was broke. Her mother had already refused to pick up the phone. Sarah had bet on the wrong horse, and now she was going to ride it all the way to the state penitentiary. And Darius, my little brother. He was in a holding cell 3 floors down. The drug charges were sticking thanks to the sheer volume of cocaine found in my car. But worse for him was the charge of auto theft. Because he had taken the car across state lines during his joyride before turning back, it was now a federal offense. He was facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years. 10 years without video games. 10 years without his dad's money. 10 years to think about the sister he had mocked and betrayed. I walked out of the police station into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the city lights. James walked beside me, putting a hand on my shoulder. "You know, Zora," he said quietly. "Most people would have just called the cops. You destroyed them. You salted the earth." I looked at the skyline of Chicago, the city where I had built my career, the city where I had fought to be seen as more than just Elijah Brooks's daughter. "They didn't just want my money, James," I said, opening the car door. "They wanted to erase me. They wanted to turn me into a memory and a paycheck." I just reminded them that I am the one who writes the checks, and I am the one who balances the books. The payoff was not just the money or the safety. The payoff was the silence. For the first time in my life, the noise of their demands, their criticism, their gaslighting was gone. I drove home to my empty house. It was a mess. The front door was broken. The living room was a crime scene. There was blood on the floor. But as I stepped over the yellow police tape, I didn't feel afraid. I felt ownership. This was my mess, and I would clean it up. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. The tremor was gone. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the foreclosure agent. "This is Zora Brooks," I said. "I understand you are seizing the property of Elijah Brooks tomorrow." "Yes, ma'am," the agent said, sounding surprised. "We are preparing the listing now." "Don't list it," I said, taking a sip of water. "I am making a cash offer. I want to buy the debt." "But why, ma'am?" the agent asked. "It is a distressed property." "Because," I said, smiling at my reflection in the window, "I want to be the one who evicts him. I want his eviction notice to have my signature on it." I hung up. It was petty, perhaps, but after 3 days of playing dead, I had earned the right to be a little petty. The debt swap was complete. The roles were reversed. I was the creditor, they were the defaulters, and I had just called in the loan. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. It seemed the fall of a prominent pastor was news that everyone wanted to witness. I sat in the front row wearing a tailored white suit that cost more than Elijah's car used to. I looked like money. I looked like power. Elijah, Darius, and Sarah sat at the defense table in matching orange jumpsuits. They looked gray and thin. Prison food and fear had stripped away their arrogance. Elijah refused to look at me, staring at his shackled hands. Sarah was weeping softly. Darius just looked at the ceiling, tapping his foot nervously. I took the stand with the grace of a queen ascending her throne. The prosecutor asked me to recount the events of that weekend. I did not cry. I did not falter. I told the story with the clinical precision of a forensic accountant. I described the break line conversation. I described the DNR. I described the insults, the theft, the insulin. When the prosecutor played the audio recordings, the courtroom went silent. Hearing Elijah's voice casually discussing my death to pay off a gambling debt was chilling. The jury looked at him with pure revulsion. Even his own lawyer looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. The verdict came back in under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for family betrayal, read the sentences. Elijah Brooks, for attempted murder and fraud, you are sentenced to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah Brooks, for conspiracy and assault, 12 years. Darius Brooks, for narcotics distribution and grand theft, 15 years. As the gavel banged, sealing their fate, Elijah finally looked at me. He mouthed one word: "Why?" I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket. I didn't answer him. I didn't owe him an answer. I turned my back on them and walked out of the courtroom, leaving them to the cages they had built for themselves. That afternoon, I went to the old house, the parsonage. It was empty now, stripped bare by the bank and the auctioneers. I walked through the rooms where I had grown up. I saw the dining room where I was told to be quiet. I saw the kitchen where I had cooked meals they didn't appreciate. It was just a house, a pile of bricks and drywall. It held no power over me anymore. I met the realtor in the driveway. "Sell it," I said, handing over the keys. "Tear it down, build a parking lot. I don't care. Just get rid of it." I got in my car, my new car, and drove toward the city. I was moving up, literally. My new penthouse was on the 45th floor of the Trump Tower overlooking the Chicago River. It was all glass and steel and light. No dark corners, no hidden cameras, no secrets. I walked into the living room where boxes were still being unpacked. On the coffee table lay a checkbook. I sat down and picked up a pen. I wrote a check for $2 million. The exact amount of the insurance policy Elijah had tried to kill me for. I made it out to the Survivors Network, a charity that helped victims of domestic and financial abuse start over. I put the check in an envelope. It was the best money I had ever spent. I walked over to the mantel where I had placed the only photo I kept from my old life. It was a picture of my mother taken just before she died 10 years ago. She looked tired, but she was smiling, holding me in her arms at my college graduation. She was the only one who had ever loved me without conditions. The only one who had told me I was smart and strong. I picked up the frame and wiped a speck of dust from the glass. "I did it, Mom," I whispered to the photo. "I cleaned house. The trash is gone. The debt is paid." I could feel her smiling back at me. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a life that was finally fully, completely mine. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the bank. I was no longer the victim. I was Zora Brooks. And I was free. I smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached my eyes and stayed there. The game was over. And I had won. Zora's story teaches us a harsh but liberating truth: you cannot buy the love of those who only value your utility. For 35 years, she tried to purchase her father's approval, only to realize that family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty and safety. Her victory proves that the best revenge isn't violence, but absolute success and the courage to cut toxic ties. We must learn that walking away isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of survival. Your peace is a non-negotiable asset. Never let anyone bankrupt your spirit. Have you ever had to close the account on a toxic family member to save yourself? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below.